Hi everybody, I'm Andrew J. Can you hear me at the back? Microphone's working all right. Hopefully, yeah, we're working. So I'm Andrew J. I'm with CBRE Accelerate. I'm the lead for our data center solutions advisory business for the EMEA region. It's an honor to have the opportunity to speak to you all here today. I've got a lot of colleagues here, we're around, it'd be great to talk to people afterwards. I've been briefed that 99% of the audience have never set foot in a data center before. Looking around the room, yeah, I think that's probably the case. So I've then got to cover an awful lot in 15 minutes. So that's impossible. I've put quite a bit of information on our slides. Hopefully you'll receive them. If you don't, just email me. My details are on the final slide. We'd be delighted to send them through to you. So I'm going to talk about who we are and what we do in the data center space. I'll talk about what a data center is and who the main players are. I'll talk about the different ways we deploy capital into the data center space, and why now for Africa? And I'll talk about some of the specific African locations that we're seeing significant interest in. So CBRE Accelerate's fairly well known. What you probably don't know is that we have a very mature data center business. We turn over around $1 billion a year in data centers. It's massively important to us. We take data centers really, really seriously. And we think that a converged service model is the right one. We take our traditional real estate services, the 1,300 people we've got with iAccelerate, best-in-class team. We add that to the operations and projects division, which is 4,500 engineers. That's a global line of business. And then we bring in the advisory business, which is based on a 3 geographic regions for the world model. And our data center business is growing at about 20% per annum. So, something's working reasonably well. So in the advisory center of excellence, we're divided into individual service lines. We've got the traditional stuff, occupier rep, capital markets, site transactions. But site transactions, we've got a bunch of people who are just day in, day out acquiring or provisioning land for data centers across EMEA, highly, highly specialized. Data centers are eye-wateringly expensive to build, and they are absolutely mission critical for the people that put their IT equipment into them. And so the mantra is don't dabble in data centers. Global coverage, consistency of service delivery, hugely important because the developer operators are pan-regional and global, and the 3 big customers are all global. That has to be the approach. Our EMEA advisory hub, that manages the international clients, and it's responsible for growing locally. And so as demand in Africa has grown, so can't see at the bottom there, we've got our country reps now across Africa, and we've got Angus Murray, who's our local leader. So we've got some structure in place. So what is a data center? Well, it's a building that is specifically built to house IT equipment. That is servers, storage, and network equipment. And the guiding principle is that IT equipment must be on permanently. From the day it's put in there and turned on to the day it's taken out and put into a skip, it's got to be on. And so this drives key principles. They take these key principles to a ridiculous extreme. So it's got to be on all the time. It's got to be safe, away from any kind of damage. So power supplies, for example, we have an incoming power supply. We don't have one, we have another one, just in case the first one fails. Power, obviously, a very topical subject at the moment here. We assume that 2 power supplies stop working, so we have some generators. We assume some of those don't work, we have extra ones. And what this does is create a very, very expensive building. $12,000 US per square meter to build the shell and the M&E fit out. You know, it's very, very expensive. And that excludes land, excludes power, and excludes the IT equipment that goes into them. Power is our key metric, so we don't really talk about square meters, we talk about rates per kilowatt of IT power in terms of build costs and even rental values. And most data centers look very much like logistics warehouses. They're big boxes, no windows, high security. There are several different types of data centers. We've got the enterprise facilities. Generally, they're built by big banks, were built 10, 15 years ago. The big banks don't really build data centers anymore. They tend to use co-location companies, or they put their IT into the cloud. Co-location is the main type. This is where all the action is. Specialist data center developer operators. They will build these data centers and lease them to the end users. We have retail. It's like a serviced office for IT. You take tiny chunks of space, 20 square meters in a caged area, in a shared data hall. You rent it for 1 to 3 years. Using that same office analogy with wholesale, it's more like leasing an office building floor to floor. So you might have 5 tenants in a building, and they take longer term leases. Hyperscale companies. So the hyperscale companies are Amazon, Microsoft, Google, the 3 global public cloud companies. They are responsible for taking over 85% of all of the co-location space in the world at the moment. So hugely important to understand what those hyperscale companies are doing. As well as taking co-locate, they will self-build, and they will also get developer operators to build to suit for them. And these are the developer operators. They are mostly pan-regional. They're global. Equinix is the biggest retailer. Digital Realty is the biggest wholesaler. The maturity model is quite well established. So local operators develop. They are then bought out by these big global companies. And acquiring land for data center development presents some challenges for the operator, but also for you as property owners, some really interesting opportunities. Location criteria are very, very specific. Often it's very much linked to minimum fiber distances. But there's also a lot of other factors which you can't even see that will influence why a data center is put where it is. Data centers use a huge amount of power, usually 2 kilowatts per square meter of gross area. And the buildings normally are about 25 MVA of size, so 25 megawatts. Gives you a feel, you know, you don't get this from a 3-pin plug that you might use. Electricity is what goes into a chip, microchip, and you get some processing power and you get heat. This is why we have a lot of cooling infrastructure to make sure that the IT is operating at its most efficient temperature. Despite using a huge amount of electricity, the data centers are incredibly efficient at using that power. So 80% of the power that comes into the facility gets used to create processing power. In the old days, that used to be 50%, and the other 50% was spent on cooling. And the data center users, I love them to bits, but they're the most paranoid people you will ever meet in your lives. If there's any risk of flood, danger, anything that could happen, they're not going to touch that, that destination, that location. So what about options to deploy capital? Well, in terms of traditional, go back one. In terms of traditional real estate investment, there's only a very small number of these enterprise-type data centers that come to the market, often on a sale and leaseback basis. But we don't have that traditional develop, let, sell type model. It's very much a develop, let, hold model, building these big operating companies. And so you could invest in a data center operating company, or you could become a direct developer. So different levels here, from provisioning land for data center development, that's bringing in the power supply and the permitting. Just doing that can add 20% to the value of your piece of dirt. It's really, really interesting. You can go to the next stage. You can build a shell building, which is ready for someone else to come and fit out with the M&E infrastructure, or you can go the whole hog, spend all of that money, and build a fully fitted data center, which you would then have to operate and find customers for. Very, very specialized. Joint ventures are an option. The successful ones tend to be where we have developers and capital coming together. So a lot of investors are choosing the M&A route as a gauge of how hot that market is. M&A values 2016 to 2020 averaged $19 billion a year. Last year, we saw $41 billion traded. Was that a flash in the pan? Well, this year to the first half, we've seen $24 billion traded. So it looks like we're going to have another record year. So, you know, that M&A activity is here to stay. Africa is definitely following the trend. Digital Realty is a perfect example. They've bought Terraco for South Africa, Medallion for Nigeria, and iColo for Kenya and Mozambique. Timing, as all things in life, is one of the keys to success, and particularly in such a capital-intensive industry. So why now for Africa? Well, is it the right time? You'll know the Africa metrics much, much better than I do, but they're certainly compelling as demand drivers for IT services. An already large, fast-growing, young population, high smartphone penetration. You know, what is there not to like about those demographics? But it's not all about population. It is also about GDP. Hugely, hugely important. If for a minute we indulge ourselves and ignore GDP, then the population metric by itself suggests a massive need for data centers. So the chart on the right shows UK and US populations relative to their co-location stock. If we use the same ratio and apply it to the 1.2 billion people in Africa, then potential demand could be 16 to 21,000 megawatts of data center capacity required for Africa in the future. And if you think that each megawatt will cost around $8 million to build, that's a hell of a lot of capital that's needed. So today, as a benchmark, Africa has less than 300 megawatts of data centers. So there's some way to go. Do we have proof points for these bold statements, or even for a fraction of the demand? Well, we do. I'm here today because 12 months ago we had 0 instructions in Africa. Today we have 9. So we've got site acquisitions that we're in the middle of in Luanda, Tunis, Johannesburg, Cape Town, and Dakar. And we're going through provisioning exercises on land to sell, to enhance value for, in Ghana, and we've got 2 sites in Nairobi. They're happening at the moment. But Africa, you know, is not, absolutely not easy. There are some very, very significant challenges, many of them. The power grid instability, lights went off earlier, land ownership challenges, political risks, to name but a few. But before I finish, a key prerequisite I have to mention is the data center development reliance on connectivity. And it's really important to be aware that the subsea cable capacity has changed immeasurably over the last just couple of years. Just look at all of those cables going around Africa and teeing off into the coastal countries. Google has invested in the Equiano cable. Well, if they've invested, my God, they're going to want some data centers to use that cable. So I want to conclude with a comment on some future themes that I think we're going to see. Most activity to date has been in the Tier 1 cities, so South Africa, Kenya, Nigeria, in Egypt. it's absolutely coming to the tier 2 markets. So Senegal, Ivory Coast, Ghana, and Morocco are absolutely there. Next is that the local African operators are expanding significantly. Africa data centers, open access data centers. Keep an eye on the regional telco players. They're all doing something in the data center space. And then finally, we've already seen a few of the global players enter the market, NTT, Vantage. Well, there's going to be a hell of a lot more, and they are all seriously looking at Africa at the moment. Thank you. That's it from me. We've got my details are there. If you want to ping us a note, we'll send you the presentation. With our team, with Angus and Oscar, we're around. So delighted to talk to anyone over the next day or so. Thank you very much indeed.